All right, so welcome to the fourth lesson of the figure section. Now we're going to try and do more dynamic poses in perspective using figure mannequins, right? So we're still going to stick to our mannequins, but now that we've gone through lesson 3, which was the, sort of the shape manipulation of bending and twisting, now we're going to try and incorporate that into our mannequins. And this is something that you'll see will highly, improve the gestural skill or your gesture drawing when it comes to figures, because sometimes we over focus on when people hear gesture drawing, they hear that line of action and the contour and the silhouettes and things like that. But you can make your figures look already more dynamic by applying the shape manipulation that I talk about in lesson 3 and the other ones that we'll discuss in later lessons. So what we're going to do now is we're going to draw mannequins with manipulated shapes, primarily the twisting and bending that I talked about. So again, the poses are going to be probably a little bit more dynamic. They don't have to be, but in the assignments at the end of this video, again, I will definitely task you to do a couple of them neutral and a couple of them in an action pose. But so what I mean when I say that we're going to apply this to our mannequin is that instead of having our normal rigid mannequin that you saw in the previous videos, we're now going to try and apply some shape manipulation to them. So what could that look like? For instance, let's say we have a figure, and I'm trying to think of something that is looking away from us, with his or her shoulders towards us, or the back of her shoulders towards us, but then facing this way, right? So, we might think of an upshot, camera angle. So again, figure is facing away from us, and this is where we go to apply that twisting of the form. Again, a little bit of a bend on the upper leg. Maybe the other leg is facing forward. And another bend on the lower leg, right? Something like this. And then same for the other side. Again, the cool thing about this one is that it also allows for a little bit more room for error, because you're essentially also, applying some gesture into it. It will look a little bit more fluent. That might mean that you have to sacrifice some structural, issues, or, structural approach or some perspective, but incorporating a little bit more dynamic lines into this, you'll create a more natural feeling to your bodies. And so that's the gist of this assignment, and that's what I want you to focus on. Right. And as always, try to have fun with your figures. And try to apply some of that shape manipulation that I've talked about. And again, usually in my mannequins these days, I don't really use a box, but I'm just trying to do this for demonstration purposes. So as you can see, all I'm doing really is I'm keeping my mannequin, but I'm just incorporating a little bit more manipulation. To make it feel a little bit more dynamic. And again, I'm trying to do this from imagination, which means that sometimes the poses might look a little bit wonky or a little bit off. But again, I'm just trying to tackle a couple of problems at the same time. But as you can see, what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to twist and bend these mannequins to make them feel a little bit more dynamic. And this is where you're really gonna start to, start learning about exaggeration of your mannequins. Like, for instance, this rib cage is just a bent cylinder, a bent box, right? So it's all I'm drawing. Like this really exaggerated bent box, and a little bit of an exaggeration on the legs as well, because you'll see this often in comic books, right? Especially like if you look at some of the awesome drawings on Spider-Man, like they're super dynamic, and of course things in the gesture like line of action really applied there, but it's also just the manipulation of the shapes that they're applying, which makes it look so fantastic, and that's what I'm trying to teach you guys here. It's like really get to understand these basic shape manipulations in order to apply them in your own art. You can imagine this guy having something like a sword. If you want to add props into it, feel free. Right? Just have fun with the manipulation itself. Right, so as you can see, of course, in the figure itself, we're not going to have extreme manipulation, like extreme twists or extreme bends. But you can see that, when I talked about the minor axis, we're really manipulating that minor axis to fit our mannequin and make it a little bit more dynamic. All right, let's do one more. And again, feel free to play with your proportions a little bit. Again, just all I'm doing here is bending. Oh, bending, small mistake. Bending in that sphere just a little bit, right? It's just a bend. Right, so as you can see, it's a lot of fun because you can just really focus on the task at hand, which is drawing your mannequin, which you should have gotten better at from doing the first assignment on mannequins. And then on top of that, we're now starting to add some manipulation to those mannequins. So again, and don't fret about making mistakes. You can make mistakes. That's part of the process is just trying to work with your mistakes. Like for instance, this hand is a little bit too big for the overall proportions, but again, the gesture is there of the figure, right? The spatial awareness is there, and that's the most important part, and that's what you should focus on. And again, also when you go to submit, what we're looking at is just clarity in your drawing, right? We're not looking at the most beautiful drawings or the most technically accurate. We're looking for understanding when you're drawing these. Like, we need to understand where you're coming from when you're trying to communicate to us your poses. And again, you can look at reference. I highly recommend a lot of you that are a little bit more advanced to try a lot of these from imagination, because it will just help you so much in starting to concept things. All right, let's do one more. A little bit of a bend again. On that box. And again, the hardest thing here is also going to be just, being considerate with your perspective. Right? That's going to be the hardest one to keep in check when you're doing, these more dynamic sketches. So yeah, as you can see, tons of fun to do, really figuring out, how to pose your mannequins, have a little fun with them, how to manipulate them, especially, the limbs. You can create a lot of gesture here just by simply manipulating the forms, and not overthinking it, but really just having fun with each individual, proportion of your figure. And again, that's the great thing about, when you look at reference, for instance, if you want to do this with reference, just exaggerating what you see in the reference, exaggerating some of the rib cage going forward, or how the legs are positioned, stretch that a little bit, manipulate it a little bit, put the feet a little bit wider apart, play with the rib cage coming forward like this, these are like really cool exaggerations that you can try. Don't try to, that's why I wouldn't advise in this lesson is don't copy from other artists, right? So don't go for like the typical Spider-Man poses and try to copy that, because you're basically just copying someone else's manipulation of the form. Look at real life reference, look at real life poses, and then try to do them yourself with these manipulations. That will increase your visual library so much more than just copying what you see. All right? So for your assignment of this course, what I want you to do, of course, is you're going to draw, again, 20 of these poses in a variety of angles with a lot of exaggeration. And of course, it needs to read structurally, as well as have at least a couple of manipulations going on in some of your mannequin areas, right? That's going to be the assignment for this lesson. And again, have fun with it, and I'll see you in the next one.